This seat setup is mighty sketchy. If I fall during the video, I won't be surprised. So, I've gotten a couple requests from people asking to do a video on how much my IS300 1UZ swap costs. I did a rough estimate and tallied it up the best that I could. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how much it cost me, or I should say, how much the parts I installed and purchased and etc. are valued at. Because truthfully, I did get some help from sponsorships, and also it does not take into consideration the stuff you're able to sell from doing this swap. So I have a list here. I'm going to go from cheapest to most expensive as to what it cost me, and I will talk about some help I got from sponsors because I'm transparent about that. And then I'll talk about some of the things I was able to sell. So the actual gross cost is not going to be the same as the net cost for this project. And some things I did were maybe not necessary, and some things that you can do differently. So let's go through that list. Starting out at the very bottom, thank you very much to my good friend Donald Jackson over at Pinku Style in Japan. The bell housing that I got for this, he gave to me for free. He sent it to me all the way from Japan. The reason I needed a bell housing is because I'm doing a manual transmission to the 1UZ, and I don't think a 1UZ was ever mated to a manual transmission. So to do this swap, or at least the swap that I did, I needed an automatic UZ bell housing to go to the adapter kit that I got to my transmission. So I needed a bell housing, and Donald Jackson was a good guy and he gave it to me for free. But I'm sure you can find them for stupid cheap. Next is the power steering rack bracket. I had all that material laying around. It took some time to make that bracket, but it is necessary, I think, if you're going to put headers on the 1UZ. Now you can make a custom header to avoid doing this, but I've been driving the car for a few months now, a couple thousand miles, and I've seen no ill effect from relocating the rack. So that bracket that I made was made out of some pretty heavy-duty steel, and it did take time, but I had all of it laying around, so it didn't cost me anything. Power steering reservoir, I got off of a 2000-something Tundra out of a junkyard with the 2UZ. I think I paid 10 bucks for that, and that came with some hoses as well. The valve cover breather that I put on the passenger side valve cover, I put a $12 breather filter on that instead of plumbing it to my intake. The throttle lock to convert the 1UZ to strictly drive-by cable was $20, I think from Excessive Engineering or something. Without that throttle lock, you have to do drive-by wire with it. And I didn't feel like messing with drive-by wire, and I kind of like drive-by cable more. I know there's some better tuning that you can do with drive-by cable, but the ECU that I have, I don't think really messes with that stuff. So I did the throttle lock to completely convert it to drive-by cable. I did have to purchase a tie rod for the passenger side since I relocated the rack, and that was $20. I deleted the ABS. Now you can relocate it, and that will cost you a couple $100, but I deleted it, and I estimated between all the fittings and lines that was about 20 bucks. I also put some heat wrap on the hoses, stupid light, on the driver's side that run near the header, like the fuel line and some other stuff, just to avoid the headers, and that was about $20 for heat wrap. I did have to buy an AC hose off of Rock Auto for an SC430, I think. I could be wrong, but I showed that in a video, and that was a $20 hose to connect the AC system. There was a lot of wiring to be done with this because I went with a Spitronics ECU. If you went with the factory ECU, you might not have to run into this much, but I'm estimating all the electrical supplies, wire, crimp connectors, etc. was about $20, and a lot of time. That was probably the most time-consuming part, was the wiring, looking at the schematics, figuring out what wire goes where, etc. Very time-consuming. I did have to get some fuel injection hose. That was about 40 bucks to connect the fuel line on the IS300 down at the bottom up to the fuel rail. I had to get fuel injection hose and 2 barb fittings, and that was about $40. I did have to modify some radiator hoses and coolant hoses. I pretty much bundled that together, and I think I spent around $70 on coolant hoses between the radiator and heater core. Transmission fluid, since I did get a different transmission. Now, some people have reached out to me and told me that the W58 that I put in might actually be weaker than the 55 that I took out. So that's up for debate, but I still have my old 55 laying around. And if the 58 that I put in blows up, I'll have the 55 to swap in. So those people could be correct that it's weaker. I'm not sure. I admittedly did not do my due diligence when researching the W58. So the one I put in had a aluminum center section, so apparently that's a weaker one. But anyway, I spent $70 in red line fluid to fill that bad boy up. Power steering lines, you could maybe do this differently. I think the power steering line I got was for an SC430 also. I got that off eBay used, and between the hard line that goes from the pump to the rack and the rubber hoses, I spent around $80 on power steering lines. Now, if you can figure out how to get your gauge cluster to work properly, you won't have to do this purchase. But I did purchase a Autometer water temperature gauge, and that was $85. The alignment cost me $100 because I did have to move the power steering rack and adjust the tie rods. I did have to buy a power steering pump. This engine that I bought did not come with a power steering pump, I think. And the pump that I bought was for a 99 LS400. I believe I got it like a remand off eBay, like a new remand, and that was $104. I did make my own intake. I did not use like the stock LS400 or GS400 intake. I did make my own out of aluminum piping and some couplers and a Sicky green filter, and that cost me around $120, something like that. Oil filter relocation. This is something that's not necessary, but between the between the adapter that bolts to the block that eliminates the factory oil filter and cooler setup, between that and the oil filter relocation kit itself and the hoses, that was around $150, and I do totally recommend it. My light just died. I do totally recommend it. It's going to make oil changes so much easier. Air conditioning pump. The 1UZ that I bought did not come with an AC pump, so I had to buy a remand one. Hopefully it even works once I figure out the electrical, and that was $160. A wideband, absolutely essential. Pretty much any project car, you really should get a wideband. It can help with troubleshooting, tuning, etc. And that was $200, an AEM wideband. I also got an oil pressure gauge. The IS300 does not have a factory oil pressure gauge, and I definitely wanted one. And it did really come in handy that day that the oil line ruptured going to my remote oil filter housing because of the crappy hoses. I have since upgraded, haven't had any problems since, but I do recommend an oil pressure gauge, and that was $200. The exhaust, actually quite affordable. I was very surprised. Now, it did take a lot of time, but I did make it myself. So I did put the OBX headers on it, and then I had to make my own Y-pipe, and then basically a mid-pipe to connect to the HKS axle back that I have. And so that incorporates quite a bit of stainless steel 2.5-inch piping. I was actually able to get a very affordable kit off Amazon of 2.5-inch stainless steel. And then I did get a flex section in there and all the clamps, and it came out to $280. So that is a mega win in my opinion. Now, it did take many, many hours of me welding it up, but I did enjoy the process. It's helping me get a little bit better at welding. But $280, I was pretty happy with that. If you go somewhere and get a custom Y-pipe and mid-pipe made out of stainless, you're probably talking $1,000 to $1,500. The clutch master cylinder, that retailed for $360 from XAT Racing. They did help me out a little bit with that, so that retails for $360, and I did have to modify it a smidgens, but it did not cost me anything other than brake fluid. The W58 transmission I bought, the questionable one that may be weaker than the one that I took out, I spent $500 on that one. I got a pretty good deal on it. I guess not if it is weaker than the transmission I took out, but we'll find out. Now, granted, this car is a daily driver. I may autocross it, but it's not a drag car. It's not a drift car. So I'm not going to be dumping the clutch and launching it and putting a lot of abuse through it. This is more of a daily car, and that's why I did the 1UZ over turboing the JZ. Engine mounts from XAT Racing, those retail for $600. I did get some help out with those also. There is a little bit of vibration. It's not bad at all. It's Not like my Sentra was, where the whole car is a maraca and the rear view mirror is unusable. It's very manageable. It's just a slight bit of vibration. Very impressive for pretty much solid mounts with a V8. I have nothing bad to say about those mounts. And then the headers. Those were around $600 also. You don't need those. You could use the stock manifolds, or you could go baller and get PPE headers or make your own. But I spent $600 on OBX headers, and the car sounds pretty good. And it runs good. The engine, apparently I got a good deal on it. Everything has gone up in price so much in the past year. I think I bought this engine a year, maybe a year and a half ago. And I paid $800 for that engine, and it came with a harness, an ECU, the manifolds, a couple sensors, and even the engine stand that it was on. And I only paid $800. Apparently now they're going for $1,200 to $1,600, which is insane. So I recommend, if you're considering doing a 1UZ swap, whether it be very soon or in the far future, buy the engine. Buy it before the price goes up, because I'm telling you, this swap is going to become more popular. Not to toot my own horn, but now that I've done pretty much a how-to on how to do this swap, more people are going to do it. There's more aftermarket support coming out for it. And I've been trying to talk to Haltech about this too. They wanted me to run one of their ECUs in the car, but they don't have a plug-and-play harness. And I'm telling them, get on it, get a harness made, because this swap is going to be becoming more and more popular, if not in the IS300, in other cars, because the cost of the JZs and other engines similar to that have gone up so much in price, it's driving people to do other options. Like, I bought this 1JZ back 10 years ago. Almost exactly 10 years ago, I paid $1,300 for this 1J with an automatic transmission and a harness, shipped to my house for $1,300. $1,300, and now they're $6,000? So if you can buy a 1J for $6,000 and a 1UZ for $800, why wouldn't you do the 1UZ? So, in my opinion, this engine swap is going to become more popular with the increased price of JZs and RBs and all that kind of stuff. And since it's going to become more popular, there will be more aftermarket support for it, and it's just going to snowball. So seriously, if you're considering doing an engine swap like this, buy the engine now. The price is only going to go up. Next is the ECU. Now, you can do this swap with the factory ECU, but I'm pretty sure you have to send it out to get it unlocked, because the ECU wants to work with the factory harness and the factory ignition and the factory key, and it's a bit of pain in the arse, and it's like $400 or $500 to get that ECU unlocked. So for $900, I just ditched the harness and the ECU and got a Spittronics ECU that was plug and play for the engine, 99.999% plug and play for the engine, and then I had to do all that wiring to get it to communicate to the car. So $900 is pretty affordable. Now, there are better ECU options out there, such as Link, and there's some other options, but they are $2,000 to $3,000. So I did the poor man mod. Option here and went with a $900 ECU and harness, and so far I really have no complaints, especially for the price. Brad and I are getting the tune really dialed in on the street. It's running really well. The only problem is the idle control. It does not have the capability to control the idle motor on the 1UZ VVTi. You can buy an aftermarket idle motor and work with that, but I have not dived into that yet. But aside from idle, which is a little sketchy, it cruises amazing. It runs really, really well. It's fairly easy to work with once you learn the software. So for $900, absolute win. I would rather have a Haltech if Haltech would make a harness, because I'm not making my own. I'm being stingy about that. So if anyone from Haltech is watching, make a harness for like an Elite 2000 or something to work with the 1UZ, and then I'll put a Haltech in there. And finally, the most expensive part, just like with this car, is transmission related, and that was the bell housing conversion kit from XAT Racing. Now, they did help me out with this also, but all the stuff that I got with that kit retails for like $1,400, and that includes the bell housing adapter plate, the throw-out bearing and slave cylinder combo, the clutch and flywheel, the pressure plate, all the ARP hardware for that, the lines to go from the throw-up bearing to the clutch master, and yeah, that was like $1,400. So really, the most expensive part for this entire swap, just like the Supra, was transmission related. Between the bell housing conversion kit and the W58 that I bought, we're almost at $2,000. And the grand total for this whole swap, to the best of my ability, the gross cost of this whole project was $7,001. So $7 grand. Cost me $7 grand to do this. It costs about $7 grand to do this swap if you do it the same way that I did. But like I said, just about 2,000 of that was just transmission related. So if you wanted to stay with like the automatic transmission out of the IS300 or whatever, that could knock a significant cost off of the price of the swap. When I did the 1J swap on this, I forget the cost of it, but just to get the R154 in and the drive shaft and all the parts related to the R154, it was like $2,000 or $3,000, whereas the 1J was $1,300. So transmission is the most expensive part. So we got $2 grand just in transmission parts, and then the headers, $600 there. You can run the stock manifolds, so that could save you another $600. And the engine mounts, questionable. I do like the mounts that I have, but if you can get away with other mounts, that could save you a significant portion as well. Even though I do recommend those mounts if you're doing a high performance application. And also the gauges. I mean, just the wideband oil pressure gauge and coolant temperature gauge, I'm at $500 or $600 in gauges. So that's a big chunk of change right there too. Now, so say you were going to do this swap and you wanted to keep it automatic. $7 grand minus $2,000 for all the transmission bull crap, so you're at $5 grand. Now there's a bunch of stuff you can sell if you take a running IS300 and you're going to do this swap. Once you take that engine out, you can probably sell that engine and cylinder head for $700 to $1,000 possibly. I was able to sell my cylinder head to a friend for a couple $100. I'm keeping the 2J block. It's right there. That will become a 1.5J eventually for this car. But you can get a big chunk of change for that engine. You can also sell the stock ECU, the mass airflow sensor. I sold the stock intake manifold, throttle body, and injectors. I got a few $100 for that. All the stuff that I think I sold from this swap of 2J stuff was like $700. So that's a big chunk of change that you get back from there. So if you take $2 grand off for the transmission stuff and you sell $600 or $700 worth of stuff, you're at $4,300, $4,400 for the cost of this swap. Not bad, not bad. And then if you keep the stock manifolds on it, bam, you're down to like $4 grand possibly. So not that bad, not that bad. The $7,000 number made me a little bit sick to my stomach, but after, I looked up what I got help with sponsorship-wise and also selling the parts, it's really not that bad, and I think it is totally worth it. Now, my opinion on this swap, I absolutely love the car. The car drives the way it should have driven from the factory. The torque makes it so much easier to drive, but if you're looking for a very high horsepower car, like if you're into drag racing or if you're into drifting and you're really searching for like 450 horsepower plus, if you want like just a very fast high horsepower car, I don't recommend the 1UZ. It is pretty limited, especially the VVTi. But if you're looking for a car that you're going to daily drive or drive very often, you're going to take it to car shows, you're going to drive it to the beach, take it to Cars and Coffee all the time. If it's not a track car, I recommend the 1UZ. This Supra here, I built it to drift, and as you know, I've never taken it to a track. And I do drive it pretty often on the street, but it's very laggy, it's ballless down low. It's like not easy to drive coming out of intersections and red lights and whatnot, driving through the city. It's not daily driver friendly, so to speak, but it hauls freaking ass up top because that's where all the power is. But the 1UZ makes the car so enjoyable to drive and so easy to drive. So if you're going to be doing a swap and you think you're going to be driving the car a lot, if it's going to be more of a daily car and not a track car, maybe you'll autocross it. But if you're going to drive it the majority of the year or the majority of the season, I absolutely recommend the 1UZ over turboing the JZ. Because a lot of people said I should have just turboed the 2J. Now, yes, that would have given me more power, but that's really all it's going to do is give you top-end power. It's not going to make the car lighter. I'm pretty sure doing this 1UZ swap makes the car lighter. I'm still waiting to get the weight. But it's not going to give you the low-end torque, and it's going to be less reliable. And the 1UZ sounds amazing. It's a million-mile motor. So if you're considering adding significant horsepower to your IS300 or other Lexus, and it's not going to be a dedicated track car, and you don't need more than 400 horsepower, absolutely do the 1UZ. But if you're going to be beating the crap out of this car, not doing street takeovers, but going to the track and whatnot, you're probably better off doing a JZ for big power. So I hope this video helps you guys out. If you have any questions regarding this swap, feel free to ask me in the comments below, but I'm sure most of the questions were probably answered in the whole swap series that I did for this. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy this. And yeah, buy the engines now because they're only going to get more expensive. See ya.